Good morning. Welcome back. We have taken a bit of a break. The last one was kind of long, it was 3 chapters. So this one's going to be kind of short. I thought about doing 25 and 26 together, but 26 is very long. So we're just going to do a short one today, and then perhaps I would imagine it's going to be Wednesday or so before I'm able to do 26. So um, one of the things that I tried to do on this chapter is understand the timing of it because that's been confusing for me in terms of where the Israelites are, and we know that they're at the end of their wandering now, and they're traveling around, and they've encountered several nations as they come to the end of their wandering, and uh, those nations are coming against them in various different ways. And uh, I believe that chapter 25 is probably during that last year of wandering. Um, that they're not quite done with it, but I think that we're right here towards the end of it. I think chapter 26 indicates that they are in the end of their wandering, and they're about to go in and start taking the promised land under God's command. So um, it's interesting because there's a number of things going on here that aren't directly explained in the chapter, but we know from other texts what happened. And so I just want to cover those things as we go along. Um, Probably talk about them towards the end of the chapter. So Numbers chapter 25 and verse 1, and Israel abode in Shittim, and the people began to commit whoredom with the daughters of Moab. Now, I want to take this back to Genesis chapter 6. Um, the idea that Israel is committing whoredom with the daughters of Moab does not mean that there weren't any females of Israel that were um, intermingling with the males of Moab. It doesn't mean that they aren't dealing with the males of Midian, but the representation here is very much like what we see in Genesis 6, where the sons of God, who represented the faithful, saw the daughters of men, who represented the unfaithful. And that's I think this passage here actually makes that case in Genesis stronger when we start talking about, who are the sons of God. The sons of God are not angels. Never do we ever see that phrase a reference to angels, to celestial angels like Gabriel. It's always a reference to faithful men of God. So I just see that here, and I don't know if anyone else sees it as strongly as I do, but I just wanted to kind of throw it out there and let you make the comparison and decide for yourself. But they commit whoredom with the daughters of Moab, and um, I think this is literal. I think you have the Moabite people. Remember with Balaam and Balak, Balaam, he does what God tells him to do in the text. Um, he goes back and he tells Balak, I can't curse him, I can't curse him, I can't curse him. And he blesses him 3 times because that's what God gave him to say. But then right after that, we see as Israel stays here that um, the Moabite women, I would argue, not from just speculation, but from what we see in other places about Balaam, um, that he taught Balak to uh, get the Israelites to sin against God, and that's what would weaken them. That's what would get them defeated. And so, when we read when we read in the book of Revelation, when it talks about how Balaam corrupted the people and got them to commit whoredoms and sin, I think that this Numbers 25 is a direct result of that help that Balaam gives to Balak. So I think the whoredom here is not just a figurative where they're going and they're taking wives of Moab, but I think they're actually prostituting themselves in the real sense with the females there, but also in the spiritual sense, in that those women are getting the men to participate in religious ceremonies, because it says in verse 2, and they called the people unto the sacrifices of their gods, and the people did eat and bow down to their gods. And Israel joined himself unto Baal Peor, and the anger of Jehovah was kindled against Israel. So the people is generic, and so I think that this is not just males of Israel and females of Moab. I think it's very generic gender-wise here. But it's a corrupting in the physical sense, because kind of like what we see in 1 Corinthians 6 with does the body of Christ you know lie with a whore, and the two become one flesh? That kind of physical representation here, but also the higher spiritual truth of the worship with a false god, or the worship of a false god, is considered spiritual whoredom. And so this is what makes God angry, is they go after these fake false god, and again, just to belabor the point a bit, why would you go after a false god? Why would you worship something that you made with your own hands? You are superior to it. You're better than it in every way. It has no intelligence. It's just something you made out of wood or clay. Um, it never made any sense to me to worship something that has never demonstrated any kind of self motivation or life, much less superiority. When you have Jehovah God, who has demonstrated that he is alive, he communicates with you, he does wondrous miracles for you, and you're going to go worship a piece of dirt. It just blows my mind that they would do that. Uh, I can understand it from the perspective if they didn't really think it was real, they were just doing it because they were enamored of the people of Moab. And you get somebody who you're attracted to, and you want to please them, and so you'll do a lot of things that you wouldn't normally do to win their favor. And I can see it from that perspective, but I just don't understand it from a serious um, why are we worshiping something that we know to be inferior to ourselves, much less in any way superior to us, like Jehovah God is? But anyway, I think this is from the teaching of Balaam. I think Balaam taught Balak how to do that, and that's why, because the Moabites were the ones that Balak ruled over. And I think that's where this comes from. Anyway, verse 4, and Jehovah said unto Moses, take all the heads of the people and hang them up before Jehovah against the sun, that the fierce anger of Jehovah may be turned away from Israel. And Moses said unto the judges of Israel, slay ye every one his men that were joined unto Baal Peor. So this worship of a false god brings the death penalty. And Moses tells those who are the ones that are in charge of such things, God has called for their heads, and we're gonna put them up out of the camp, and it's going to be a reminder to the people. And so they're supposed to kill everyone that was joined unto Baal Peor. And so this goes about. This starts happening, and then it says, and behold, one of the children of Israel came and brought unto his brethren a Midianitish woman in the sight of Moses and in the sight of all the congregation of the children of Israel, who were weeping before the door of the tabernacle of the congregation. So this judgment is going on, and this man has the audacity to bring a foreign woman, a Midianite woman, not a Moabite woman, but a Midianite woman, to the tabernacle. And he does it while they're judging. So this is why the children of Israel don't ever seem too bright to me. They do stuff that just is outright stupid. These guys are the congregation are weeping. They're upset because so many of their kinsmen are being executed for basically treason, and he brings a foreign woman that he is sleeping with before the whole congregation, and it's seen. And then when Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, so this is the grandson of Aaron, the priest, saw it, he rose up from among the congregation, and he took his javelin in his hand. And he follows the man of Israel to the tent, and he thrust the javelin through both of them. To be able to do that implies that they were doing something um, very grown up in that tent. So he catches them in the act, essentially, committing fornication, and he thrusts both of them through, the man of Israel and the woman, through her belly. So the plague was stayed from the children of Israel. So this is the last of the judgment that God calls for, the last of the execution that God calls for, and it's again, God calls Israel to be holy, to be a set apart nation, separate, to keep themselves unspotted from the world. And the only way that they were allowed to take foreign spouses, particularly women, was if they proselytized. So there was a process for it. There was a right way to go about it. God, we see, especially from the New Testament perspective, God did not leave the Gentiles without hope and without a means of well, just without grace, without a way for them to access Him. We see it that the patriarchal laws still existed, that there were faithful people. You have Moses' father-in-law, Jethro, is a priest of Midian, but he's a priest of God. He's not a priest of one of these fake deities. And then we see all the way up through to Cornelius, and there's examples all throughout the Old Testament where the Gentiles were not just left to themselves and had no opportunity for grace to be brought into the kingdom when Jesus died on the cross. They were not left without hope. But for those nations that are outside of the Israelite nation and who aren't related to this proselytizing process, God commands them to stay unspotted from them. He did not want them mixing economically, culturally, certainly not religiously, and to preserve them, to keep them so that they could, so that He through them could fulfill His promise to Abraham. When there was this corrupting influence, He cut it out, just like a cancer. And so in verse 9 it says, "Then those that died in the plague were 24,000. So 24,000. Now remember, we've been wandering for 40 years now, and they've had time to grow. They're well beyond the 2 million that came out of Egypt. They're a huge nation. That's why Balak was so afraid of them. He's like, look, you can't even, we're up here on the mountain, you can't even see where they end. There's so many of them. Talk about the sands of the sea or the stars of heaven. They were there. Their number was enormous, especially for this time period. And so losing 24,000 is a relatively small number, and that's not to downplay the significance of it. It's 24,000 people, but these 24,000 people decided that they would disobey God, and they would go after false gods and basically commit treason in a theocracy. Remember, Israel is a theocracy. They're ruled by their God, who is a living God and demonstrating His existence to them on a regular basis. And so this isn't just God being a tyrant, but this is God being a just God and demanding their lives for treason against Him. And as creator of the universe, He has every right to do that. There isn't anybody who can stand in judgment against God and say God was wrong for doing this just because these people decided not to worship Him and go worship a piece of dirt. That nobody has any authority or standing or perspective or any way the ability to judge God and condemn Him for this action. And to try to do so, you're just simply illogical. You don't understand the nature of the creator of the universe. The creator of the universe has every right in giving you life to take it away if you disobey him. And that is the what we would consider as humans, from our perspective, the harsh reality of God, that he is a just God, that he is a jealous God. But we also have to understand God in his fullness, that there was a reason for what he did in all of these cases. There is a reason that he called for the execution of these people, and that's to keep the people pure so that he could fulfill his promise to Abraham to bring the Savior of the world into the world according to his prophecies, according to his promises, so that everything that God ever says is fulfilled. And so this is the way that he sees to bring it about. And for us to hone in on one act or one thing that makes us feel bad is a misunderstanding and a misrepresentation of Jehovah God and his purpose. And so for me, I read these things, I understand them, and I'm all in. I get it. I am not one who even considers that it's my place to judge God one way or the other, but just to acknowledge that God is creator and has the authority, the right to judge these people. I can't sit here and judge and say, I withhold condemnation, or I have the capacity to condemn God, but I don't because I see. That's not my purview. I don't sit in judgment over God and declare him innocent. That's not my place. It's my place to understand and submit, and that's it. It's uh, a submissive role. It's not an authoritative role where I put myself in judgment over God and just acquit him for what he's done. That's arrogance on my part if I were to do that. And so I don't judge God uh, for any action that he takes, but I do understand it because it's explained in his word, and I get it because if you take the whole of Scripture and you understand it from the global perspective of the whole Bible, then it does make sense what God's doing here, why he's doing it. And I can be at peace with the justice of God and the wrath of God and the jealousy of God, and continue to worship him without any kind of um, hesitation, without any kind of uh, icky feeling that some people might get. I know there are people who look at this and say, why couldn't have God just let those people go and worship these false gods and stuff and just kick him out of the camp or something? Why do you have to kill them? Well, because he's God. That's his right to do, and he's keeping his people pure, and he's teaching them how important it is to be pure, because it is sin that separates all of the people from him. And he wants humanity to come back into a right relationship with him. And they can't do it if they're going after and worshiping pieces of dirt for sex. That's just the reality of the situation. All right, verse 10. And Jehovah spake unto Moses, saying, Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron the priest, has turned my wrath away from the children of Israel, while he was zealous for my sake among them, that I consume not the children of Israel in my jealousy. Wherefore say, Behold, I give unto him my covenant of peace, and he shall have it, and his seed after him, even the covenant of an everlasting priesthood, because he was zealous for his God, and made an atonement for the children of Israel. So, a couple of things here. Number one, Phinehas, the grandson of Aaron, is given a priesthood that would not depart from him because of his zealousness for God, for his jealousy on the behalf of God. He goes and he just takes care of business. He's just like, look, these people are evil and they're corrupting my people. They're corrupting the people of God. And he goes and he kills them, and he ends the corruption and stops God's wrath against Israel. If he had seen it and he had just kind of done nothing, God would have known that, and God would have continued to be angry with Israel because Israel had saw the corruption, saw the treason, and allowed it to continue. That's the opposite side of this coin. But he doesn't. Phinehas is righteously angry and executes God's judgment against these people, and God sees it, and because of it, he blesses Phinehas and says that the priesthood would not depart from him, that his children would always be priests, just as Aaron's children would always be priests. And so it's a powerful thing here. But look in verse 13, it says, even the covenant of an everlasting priesthood. If you look in Hebrews chapter 7, we can go there. Hebrews chapter 7, verses 12 through 14. Pull that up. For the priesthood being changed. I thought it was an everlasting priesthood. For the priesthood being changed, there is made of necessity a change also of the law. For him whom these things are spoken pertains to another tribe, of which no man gave attendance at the altar. For it is evident that our Lord, talking about Jesus, sprang out of Judah, of which tribe Moses spake nothing concerning the priesthood. Jesus is our high priest, and he was going to be our high priest. He has always, that has always been his destiny from before the foundation of the world. God, in his omniscience, before he said, let there be light, knew that Jesus was going to become high priest. This isn't a secondary thing, or God had to put in place something else because his first plan failed or any of that nonsense. This was always going to be what Jesus was going to do. But Jesus, to be high priest, though he is not of the tribe of Levi, being of the tribe of Judah, he could not have been a priest. He could not have been a high priest. But we have over here in Numbers 25 this idea of the everlasting priesthood. Well, everlasting, forever, all of these things that we read of, the words don't mean until time ends in the physics sense of the word time. It means until the covenant itself ends. This everlasting means it's going to be a perpetual thing during the whole fulfillment of why it exists in the first place. God isn't going to abruptly say, okay, well, Phinehas, I'm sorry, but I know we haven't finished the covenant time period or whatever, but because of such and such things, I need you to no longer, your descendants are no longer going to be priests or whatever. And it also doesn't mean that, okay, Christ died on the cross and fulfilled everything about the old covenant pertaining to him, but you guys get to keep being priests over this covenant that was only meant to point to my son in the first place. No, everything about this priesthood, even though it is an everlasting priesthood, that's an English word that doesn't quite fit the meaning that the original language is meaning to convey. It's a word that's supposed to point us to the entire duration of the covenant itself. And when did this priesthood end? Well, it ended when the covenant itself ended, at the cross. That's the book of Hebrews. When there was the death of the testator, that's when the new covenant went into effect. And by making a new covenant go into effect, the first one was made old. It was out of date. It was fulfilled. It was completed. It was what they said, the consummation, the completion of everything that happened. And so this everlasting priesthood ended. And there isn't any conflict there. There's no contradiction. You just have to understand contextually what the original word means in spite of what the English word kind of conveys to us. But Phinehas and his descendants are blessed because of Phinehas's righteous action. All right, verse 14. Now the name of the Israelite that was slain, even that was slain with a Midianitish woman, was Zimri, the son of Salu, a prince of a chief house among the Simeonites. So from Simeon, and he was a prince. He was a high up official. He wasn't just some guy. And so you have here, I think, a reflection of this idea of power. People thinking that when they're in power, when they're in some government place fairly high up, that that authority can become a heady experience where they think that they have the ability to get away with things. I mean, we see that in our own day, where people who are in positions of authority think they can get away with things that the rest of us couldn't get away with. And so he's a prince, a chief of the house of the Simeonites. And Phinehas is like, nope, I don't care who you are committing treason, and it's the death penalty for you. And the name of the Midianitish woman that was slain was Cosbi, the daughter of Zur. He was head over a people and of a chief house in Midian. So you kind of have this princess thing going on where they're trying to, the Midianite people know that the Israelites are way too big to defeat physically in combat, and so they're trying to marry their people in, and maybe they'll be protected that way. And Jehovah spake unto Moses, saying, Vex the Midianites and smite them, for they vex you with their wiles, wherewith they have beguiled you in the manner of Peor, and in the matter of Cosbi, the daughter of a prince of Midian, their sister, which was slain in the day of the plague for Peor's sake. And just to be clear here, Moses' wife was a Midianite woman, and they even brought it up when um, in the past few chapters we've talked about that Moses was accosted by people rebelling against him, claiming his wife was a Midianite woman. How does he get to have a Midianite woman? Well, she was, number one, the daughter of a priest of God, not of some foreign god. She participated in, even though she, being a female, was not circumcised, she had her son circumcised. It was demonstrated very blatantly for us. And so she was what we would consider as a proselyte. And so she was perfectly acceptable to God in that sense. But this other woman was a worshiper of a false god. And so it's not the same thing. It isn't an equal situation here. And so Moses has said, look, the Midianites, they're trying to vex you, they're trying to corrupt you, they're trying to subvert your people, and so you need to smite them. You need to teach them a lesson and go and attack them. And so that's what brings us to this point: is this corruption, this attempts to subvert when they can't overtly attack and take them out. You know, Balak knows that the Moabites are not going to be able to attack Israel and win. The Midianites know they're not going to be able to attack the Israelites and win. They had a joint alliance. The Moabites and the Midianites were working together. Remember, they sent people to Balaam together and wanted to curse the Israelites together. But Balaam wouldn't do it. Balaam didn't want to lose his power or his reputation that he had of being able to truthfully predict the future. And so he never gave that part up of his power. But I think he did it for power. I don't think he did it. He was a man who we just got finished talking about the parable of the sower yesterday during worship, and I think Balaam was one of those who was letting the tares, the weeds, the thorns, choke out what God had given him as a blessing, was his ability to, as a, he's not an Israelite. Balaam was not an Israelite. He was a Gentile, but he was part of that patriarchal system where God was still talking to people directly. And God had given him power to do that. And he let the cares of the world, he let the riches of the world draw him down. And this is the end result of that. So that's it. That's the end of the chapter. And I think we've brought out all of the points that I would make, particularly considering Balaam and where this is going. But we're here towards the end of the wandering in the wilderness, and they are about to attack Um, and we're going to see some familiar stories here again, but I want to make sure that I get the timing right on it, and talk about uh, when are these things taking place, and that this takes place when they go from being faithful and at the end of the wandering, and they're doing good as they move around, and remember, they're being attacked. They're not provoking any attack, they're just moving around as God moves them around. And they've been attacked by three different nations. um, we see this righteousness here in after about 39 years of wandering. And then all of a sudden, the Moabites and the Midianites find a way to corrupt them, and they're very rapidly um, corrupted. And it brings to mind Galatians chapter 1. I marvel that you are so soon removed from the grace of God unto another gospel. And um, the quickness with which people can fall is just mind blowing. The rapidity with which someone can go from being faithful to um, somebody who turns their back on God is amazing. Here they do it in a year. It's within a year's time that they go from being faithful to God and ending the wandering, and now 24,000 people are dead because they gave in to some hotties from another nation. Um, So that's just what it brings to mind to me, understanding the timing of all of this. But anyway, thanks for studying with me, and if you got something out of this, pass it on. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments, and I look forward to studying with you further. Y'all have a wonderful day.